Welcome to SuperTalk, the podcast that scratches your superhero itch. Just two suburban dads nerding out over superhero stuff on the small screen and the big. Buckle up, people. Enjoy the ride. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for joining us. I usually say we're going to try to make this short, but you know what? We're going to go for 2 hours.
And the joke is, what you guys don't understand is we've been talking for an hour and a half before we start the recording. So everybody says, try to keep it under an hour. Look, there's no way, because we've been talking for an hour and a half already. So not happening. We'll do our best though.
All right, let's get this party going. And 3, 2.
Welcome to SuperTalk, the weekly podcast dedicated to news and reviews of comic book media on the big and small screen. This is episode number 21. I am your host, Brian Professor Pettis, and with me, as always, is my illustrious co-host, Titanium Tony Estrella. The Titanium one, how are you doing, brother?
Professor, take us to school. I guess we're legal now. We're 21.
21.
We are legal to drink. So to toast to 21, brother. Thank you.
Cheers.
Awesome.
And we're spending a lot of time with a lot of people who aren't legal to drink during graduation party season.
Graduation party season, baby. I love it. Congrats to all the grads.
It is a very exciting time for those of us who are parents of children who are moving on to another stage in life.
Bigger and better things.
Yeah, and so congrats to all of those out there who are graduating high school, graduating college, moving on to full-time jobs, moving into college for the first time. It's exciting. And hey, man, the weather took a turn for the hot here recently, and what a perfect weekend to have some grad parties.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and good luck as you explore the next chapter of your life. It's an exciting one. Stay safe. Remember, you go to college to get a degree, not to party. But
wow.
Is that debatable?
Hang on.
Is that debatable? If you
get a degree while partying, that's okay.
Well, time management is everything. Time management. Titanium says time management, okay? Let's go.
All right. Well, before we get started this week, we want to always thank our sponsor, Studio GG Studios, home of the man band, Corn on the Cob. We will always put a link to their YouTube page in our show notes. Please visit them, like, subscribe, thumbs up. Do everything you can to give them some support, because they throw tons of support at us. And thank you again for being such a great sponsor of ours.
Thank you, Studio GG Studios. We love you.
And also to our Patreons, patreon.com/supertalk.
My peeps.
Yep, these are the people that decide to support the show directly. $1 per episode, they become patrons, and they're now the people that are bringing this episode to you directly. Thank you for supporting us, and if you want to sign up to become a patron, patreon.com/supertalk.
Yeah, thanks for the support, guys. We really appreciate it. All 450 of you.
All right, well, Titanium, we are 2.5 minutes into the scramble to 35 minutes this week that we've been challenged to do, and we're not going to get there. But let's start off. We'll get into news and review section.
Yeah.
A little bit of news this week about Dr.Strange 2. So you and I kind of have heard some rumblings, and there's been some stuff coming down
rumors,
this week about the villain that's going to be in. And you mentioned this last week, Titanium, that the Doctor Strange 2 really hasn't had any leaks. We haven't seen any behind-the-scenes footage. We haven't gotten any leaks about the movie. We haven't seen any kind of...
This leak's pretty big. This leak is huge.
And I wouldn't call it really a leak. It was almost a purposeful kind of...
teaser?
Spoiler or teaser from the studio. Because it came from some pretty reliable sources.
Very reliable sources. I like it.
Said two main things. That the villain in Doctor Strange 2 is going to be Shuma-Gorath. And Shuma-Gorath is...
a cyclops octopus / creature.
Wow. It is the elder of elder gods, demons of demons. It feasts and feeds on the fears and worship of, disciples. It literally is one of kind of the earliest big bads in the Marvel comic universe, and it's almost too big to some extent. But the fact that they're bringing it out now makes me think that they got some big plans for this movie.
Yeah,
and
kind of like a Dormammu or something.
So think of Shuma-Gorath as Dormammu's stepfather's grandfather, who is in charge of everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's a big deal.
Dormammu rules over the dark dimension.
Yeah.
Shuma-Gorath rules over kind of the multiverse and has the ability to kind of go wherever he feels like he wants to go. And there's cults that worship him, and he feeds off of the sacrifices they give him. And then he's just a bad dude. But to your point, he's a
Cyclops,
tentacled,
he's
eyeball,
a monster,
basically.
Yeah, he's a monster, and it would be interesting to see how they perceive that in the movie. I mean, a Cyclops, giant green tentacled creature,
and it gets into the title, the Multiverse of Madness. Shuma-Gorath is definitely involved in. It's not tied to a specific timeline or specific.
Right.
Earth realm. It's part of the multiverse. It expands all of reality, and I think that's where they're kind of using this villain, saying this is a villain that can cross multiple realities. And they say there's a big tie-in to one of the other characters we know that's going to be in the movie, American Chavez.
Yes.
And American Chavez is a very complicated character in the comic books. Was born in a reality that is kind of outside of reality.
Okay.
It's really hard to explain, but
she can jump through realities. She can jump through multiverses.
She has a superpower that allows her to open up portals into other realities.
Yes.
So she can freely move between realities. But she was born in a reality, kind of a universe that's outside of the normal realities.
Right.
And then her parents died, and she ended up, becoming part of that reality and then dispersing into the ether, and then shows up on our Earth, is being raised as a normal teenager, and then all of a sudden, her powers kind of manifest.
A young Hispanic girl,
right?
American Chavez, who opens up these portals,
she's got some cool powers. I mean, and it'll be interesting to see how they introduce her in the movie and how they use her in the movie.
From what I'm hearing is Shuma-Gorath, he is hunting her through the multiverse. He wants to
use her.
Well, not just use her, but he wants to extract her powers for himself. Another thing about Shuma-Gorath, he can enlarge himself, right? He can get bigger to a larger size to be more of a threat and more of a formidable foe, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that'll be cool. It'll be interesting to see how they do that. But apparently he is hunting her, and that's part of the storyline.
And that would make
cool.
a lot of sense if she's got some kind of powers, and maybe that's one thing they're doing in the movie is they're jumping between realities, escaping from the wrath of Shuma-Gorath,
nice.
and Dr. Strange has to find a way to help her. And I think she ends up being part of the Young Avengers to some extent, fighting against them a little bit, but maybe, and again, this is another character, a very young actress playing this role.
Yeah.
Maybe this is somebody that ultimately becomes part of that team. We've
Avengers,
always thought that they're really introducing these younger Marvel characters to kind of put that team together, and maybe this is another example of that.
Can't wait for that. Phase 5. That's my prediction, bud.
Okay, and then we also got a new trailer for the Loki series, which starts a week from Wednesday. So June 9th, Wednesday, June 9th is when we get the premiere of Loki. We got another trailer for Marvel.
Yeah, a bunch of teaser clips, right? More clips.
We got the first, it looks like 30 seconds of the first episode.
Yeah.
They kind of dropped that to us and showed him being processed into the TVA.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, and they show him being brought in by some TVA law enforcement officer, and gets dropped in, and his clothes get stripped off him. He's like, "Hey, hang on a second," and it was really cool, and it shows the seriousness of the situation he's in with the TVA.
Oh, no question. Yeah. That was exciting. I mean, those clips. He's a great actor, by the way. But those clips got me more excited for this show. I can't wait for it. It's we're gonna have a lot to talk about.
We've talked about Marvel casting and the home runs they've hit with some of these guys. I mean, Tom Hiddleston is not only a real home run for Marvel, but I think with this series and even going forward, this character is going to continue to pay back and pay dividends. I have no doubts that he'll be in, to some extent, Thor: Love and Thunder. And we'll see him going forward. And we've talked about this before. They've already greenlit Loki for a season 2 already.
Yeah.
And that shows you how much confidence they have that this is going to be a big success.
Can't wait. This is going to be a good show.
Yeah, and the other big rumor about this is now we heard this week, rumor dropped that they're going to debut a character in the Loki series that we understand. We kind of were already teased that this was a character was going to be revealed at some point in time during Marvel Phase 4. But now this is going to be kind of like their next version of a big bad. So we had Ultron, and then we had Loki originally, then we had Ultron, then we had Thanos, and now, well, who's the next big bad? Well, the next big bad might be Kang the Conqueror,
right?
Who's a time-traveling supervillain,
right?
And we're now being told that Kang the Conqueror is likely to premiere in the Loki series in some form or fashion. And we know that character is going to be in the next Ant-Man movie, which comes out
Ant-Man and the Wasp,
beginning of 2023.
They've already confirmed that he's going to be in there, yeah.
So to have that character debut in the Loki series means, hey, this is setting up maybe something that's coming down the road for the next couple of years with Marvel.
Yeah, I agree.
Really big news.
Buckle up, because next couple of weeks, we're going to be kind of getting ready and getting in shape. We're going to be exercising our nerd brains for. We're going to have a great run here, Professor.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to have a really good run.
The next, we're in a little bit of a lull at the moment, and we're scrapping for content. But in the next, I'd say 2 months, 2.5 months, 3 months is going to be action packed.
Yeah,
it's going to be great. We also got some news about the new Green Lantern Corps series that's coming to HBO Max. So we talked about this a few episodes ago, that HBO came out and announced that they were developing a series or a show for HBO Max featured around the Green Lantern Corps. Now, we've always been told that DC is planning on a Green Lantern Corps movie.
Right.
And that's been rumored, kind of put on the back burner. We're not really sure what the future of that is. There was lots of rumors that Zack Snyder put a version of Green Lantern in his Snyder Cut, but they made him take it out, and all these other things.
Well, he proved that he did, because he had some pictures and footage, and he was like showing somebody his phone. See, this is what he looked like, and somebody took a snapshot of it.
But we do believe that they're making a Green Lantern Corps movie.
Yeah, that'd be
sometime
cool
in the future, but we know they're making a Green Lantern Corps series for HBO Max, and I think this is really going to be talking about the Green Lantern Corps and some of the Green Lanterns from history, and really giving us a backstory so that we can buy into the Green Lantern Corps themselves. And we got some big casting news this week. They casted a couple of actors in roles that we know that are coming. So Finn Wittrock is going to be cast as Guy Gardner. So Guy Gardner is really a future version of Green Lantern, past
Hal Jordan.
Hal Jordan.
The one we all know, most common, the one that Ryan Reynolds played. That's Hal Jordan.
Right. But, Guy Gardner was, kind of the future version of a Green Lantern. And then Jeremy Irvine is being cast as Alan Scott, and Alan Scott was the original Green Lantern in DC Comics. Back in the Justice Society days, when Green Lantern was part of the JSA, Alan Scott. They're going to go back and do the Alan Scott version in this series. So I think that's great, and we think that they're doing some version of that Green Lantern in the Stargirl series that's on HBO Max as well. So I mean, the fact that we're getting more and more Green Lantern content is great for DC.
Oh, no question, yeah.
Great character, great slew of characters across the Green Lantern Corps.
All of them, yeah. I'd love to see a Corps movie and focus a little bit on space. Would be kind of cool.
Yeah. So that was great news. You got some news about Titans, right?
Season 3, the Titans. The Titans.
Mike Tyson?
No, not his family's out of it. They actually got cut from the scene. But the Titans, season 3, is going to launch in August
on HBO Max, right?
HBO Max, yep. Season 3. I can't wait for that.
Great
That's gonna
news.
Be awesome.
I know. I watched the first 2 seasons originally on the DC Universe streaming service that DC launched a couple years ago. That kind of eventually all that content made its way to HBO Max when HBO and Warner Brothers launched that service. Titanium got a chance to watch those first 2 seasons and was like, wow.
You wore me down. I was very slow to the pull, and you wore me down. You're like, dude, you have to watch this series. I'll get to it. And then when I finally did, I binged the shit out of it. And I was texting you constantly like, oh man, this is good. This isn't bad. This is great. This is good. Yeah,
good actors and actresses, great characters, some smoke shows.
A couple of disappointing characters, but overall, I really liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the fact that season 3 not only was being made during the coronavirus pandemic, but now is going to be launching in August. It's great news. Now we get some new content coming to HBO Max in August. This is fantastic.
Yeah. And
literally, it's adds to our list of stuff that we're going to be talking about.
And it's a win for DC. They need it, right? They're a little slow.
And I also did hear that Young Justice, the animated series that was on HBO Max last year, highly successful, has 3 seasons now. Its 4th season is just finishing up now, and whether that launches later this year or early next year, they're just finishing that up as well. So great. The fact that is being done, and I mean that's one of the best animated series that DC's ever put out is Young Justice.
Batman, the Long Halloween, right? Yeah. That's coming out,
and that's coming to Blu-ray, DVD in the June-July time frame, and then we should see that in HBO Max probably in the fall at some point in time
great
as well.
That trailer looked kick-ass, though, by the way.
Oh, yeah. The Long Halloween? Yeah, that looks great. And then you got another one that came out this week, right?
Yeah, Batgirl. They finally, I think they're moving forward with it. I mean, Josh Whedon was tied to it for a little bit, and he was going to do it because of his background with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the success of that. I think they wanted him to do a Batgirl movie. And then it kind of died on the vine.
And this is the Barbara Gordon version of Batgirl?
Barbara Gordon version. So they just signed, and I don't know their names, but they just signed the 2 directors that did Miss Marvel for Disney Plus to this project. So they're actually moving forward with this project, which is great because although I liked Batwoman on the CW, the first couple of episodes, and then it kind of died for me and I lost interest.
What a joke that's been.
It's been awful.
They had Ruby Rose cast as Bat.
And I liked her. I thought she was
good.
Great.
And she just lost interest, and the ratings weren't fantastic. She ended up leaving the show. They recast the actress to play, and now it's an African-American woman playing Batwoman.
Great actress, but the show just does nothing.
It's just really somewhat empty.
Yeah.
But yeah, Batgirl... I mean, we grew up watching Batgirl on the 60s television show with what's his name? Adam West version.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, the Barbara Gordon, Batgirl with the red hair, red wig she'd put under her uniform was
and there's some
fantastic.
Great actors in that Batwoman series on CW. It just I think I hate to say it, but I think the writing is very weak.
Yeah.
And I think it's a shame.
Well,
that's a great character. But I'm hoping they saved themselves with this movie, and that'll be great. The directors that they have, those guys are awesome.
So the showrunner for Arrow and Flash is a gentleman by the name of Greg Berlanti, and he does a lot of the writing as well as a lot of the story development for both of those shows.
Okay.
And so they call the CW show the Arrowverse. They kind of those shows are now the Berlanti-verse, right? And so Batwoman and Legends of Tomorrow, and now it's Superman and Lois, right? That's a new show. A lot of those shows were built upon Arrow and Flash as kind of their core.
Sure.
And Greg Berlanti was very involved in both of those shows. Now these new shows that came about, like Batwoman, were like, oh, well, we'll just add another one.
Yeah.
And he can't touch all of them.
Right.
And so to your point, they assign these writers and showrunners to these new shows and properties, say, hey, we now have a new show, you go do it. And Greg Berlanti's not really as much involved in those, and I think they suffer.
Yeah, of course they did.
Right. Okay, well, let's get into the topic of the week this week. Decided to pick something kind of interesting, and Titanium and I have talked about this several times in the past, but there are a number of instances where the MCU, Marvel Comic Cinematic Universe, has deviated from the comics. And whether it's the history of that character or the history of that scenario or villain in the comics, they've deviated. And sometimes
it works.
It for good reason.
No question.
They deviate.
Well, because it continues and builds on a storyline that they're trying to achieve.
Right.
Right.
But sometimes it's like, and there are not, especially early on when Marvel movies first started coming out, this is, and I'm going back maybe as far as the first X-Men movie back in 2000. Marvel comic nerds were just like, you better be accurate to the comics and the history and the characters, and if you go off, base a little bit, we're going to hold you to it. And I think Kevin Feige, when he did Iron Man, he kind of gained a little bit of leverage to say, I'm going to respect the history in the comic books, and I'm going to pull from it,
right,
and I'm going to use it when it makes sense, but I'm not going to beholden to it when it doesn't make sense.
Well, it definitely puts up the safety rails and guardrails on a story when you start, forcing yourself to obey by the comic rules. And sometimes it's just not realistic, and people, you know what I'm saying?
And what makes sense in print may not necessarily make sense in the movies.
You can't keep bringing dead superheroes back.
Some of these characters were developed in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and now we're in modern times, and technology's changed, and so some of the explanations for how things happened back then really don't kind of carry weight today.
I know this first one irritates the shit out of you.
Well, there's a few of them here.
But this first one I think really irritates.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to do is just, I'm not going to jump into all of them because there's a ton of these examples, and we could go endlessly talk about them. But
let's not.
Yeah, there's some that I do want to touch on, and the first one is the character Spider-Man, and as everybody that listens to the show and is involved with any of these movies, there's 3 different iterations of Spider-Man in the movies. There's the early Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire version of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Eventually, that was retired for the Andrew Garfield version of the Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And we had 2 movies from him. And then we went into the Tom Holland version of Spider-Man when Marvel Studios became involved, right?
Yeah.
And so there's some character things that happened with each one of those that kind of were deviations from the comic book, we'll say, history. The first one, the Tobey Maguire, we'll say the first Spider-Man 1 from Tobey Maguire, did a great job of selling his backstory and showing how he got his powers by being bitten by a radioactive spider.
Yep.
And we saw the death of
Very
Uncle Ben.
comic book true.
We did the complete origin story. We saw the death of Uncle Ben and how it drove him to understand his responsibility, the powers he got. It was all great. Well, one of the things they did with that character was, and Sam
With
Raimi...
great power comes great responsibility.
Right. But Sam Raimi explained this after the fact. He said, it just didn't make sense that, a teenage kid would be able to develop these, like, web shooters, right? And why would he? So what they did was they had Tobey Maguire's character, a version of Spider-Man, he had this little spot on his wrist that once he got bit by the spider, it was kind of weird. And that's how he learned that webs would shoot out of his wrist. And it was like, they made it more of a natural part of his mutation.
Like a real spider would shoot out of this gooey spot on his wrist. Both wrists had this gooey, webby spot that he could shoot webs out of. Yeah.
And so, as a comic book fan, it was one of those things was like, no. And for a couple of reasons. One, the reason why Peter Parker is such a great character is because not only is he a bitten by a radioactive spider, has the powers of a spider and all this.
He's a boy genius.
He's a scientist. He's a kid who's a boy genius. And he developed and invented this web fluid that he eventually could, factor into a thing around his wrist that he could shoot from his wrist. And it was like one of the great things about him as a character in the comics. And then that Tobey Maguire version just kind of completely discounted that. And it's also one of those kind of great things that they use in the comics where, like, if we can disable his web shooters as a villain, if I can disable his web shooters, then I'm going to, take something away from him that he won't ever have again. And so I felt that was kind of just did a disservice to the character.
And they've done that in the movie a couple of times where they disabled his web shooters.
Right.
Electro kind of shot in,
Well, that was in the Andrew Garfield.
Right.
Well, but what they did with Andrew Garfield with that kind of part of his character, they showed that Oscorp was experimenting on these radioactive spiders, which kind of they showed that he got his powers that way too.
Yeah.
But these radioactive spiders, now they found that there's this one spider that was radioactive that could create these incredibly high dense tensile strength, webs.
Yeah.
And Andrew Garfield's character goes in and steals these capsules of the fluid that those experimental spiders created and used them to create this web shooter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so he stole a technology that Oscorp developed to like make web shooters. I'm like, that's not what Peter Parker would do. Right?
Yeah.
So that kind of made me kind of upset about that whole thing. And I think they ended up getting it right with Tobey Maguire's character, right? So they showed, and this even as far back as when he first showed up in Civil War, and they showed that he was, he was a tinkerer. He'd bring all these computer parts home, would do all these crazy things.
Yeah.
And when Tony Stark was talking to him in his apartment, but in the first movie, Homecoming, they showed him in his classroom. He'd like pull the drawer out, and he's like, mixing up this new formula for the web fluid, and then it was like this stuff bubbling up, and so they showed that he was a scientist. He developed this stuff on his own.
Yeah, which is cool.
And so they were a little more true to that in there. And then you and I have talked about this before. Also, the whole fact that they never, ever, ever have addressed spider sense as a power or ability. There's been a couple scenes in some of the movies where you feel that the character has a spider sense.
Yeah,
but they
Tobey
never really
Maguire
talked.
saw the car coming through the cafe when Doc Ock threw it at him. But did Andrew Garfield? He kind of had somewhat of a spider sense.
Well, and then that one scene in Infinity War when Tom Holland's sitting in the bus and his hair's raised up on his arms.
Yeah,
they make that seem like. But the fact they never. If you remember the old,
they call it the Spidey Tingle. Remember,
that's what
Spidey Tingle.
If you remember back in the late '80s, mid to late '80s, there was a show on cartoon on television called Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Uh-huh.
It was Spider-Man and Iceman and Firestar.
Okay.
And they had this cartoon, and he would come on the cartoon and said, "Oh, my spider sense is tingling. I can tell something's going on or something's happening."
Right.
They've never gone into that in any of the movies.
Yeah.
And I think they've lost on the fact that, and you and I've talked about this before, it's one of his greatest superpowers. The fact that he's got this spider sense, it kind of tells him when things are wrong.
Yeah.
But also he can sense when punches are coming or when bullets are being shot at him or whatever. And the fact they've never really developed that as a power is something I think they've missed out on in comics. Right. Okay. Let's move on. Iron Man. We saw in Iron Man 3, so we know that the original Iron Man 1 movie in the MCU, he gets hit by one of his own missiles, and shrapnel goes into his chest.
Yeah.
And the only way that he's alive is he gets a electromagnet put into his chest, and it keeps the shrapnel away from his heart.
Yeah, that's the doctor with whatever he could muster up. Created this to help him keep him alive.
Box of scraps.
Yes, a box of scraps. Yeah.
But and then Tony eventually develops the arc reactor,
a mini
arc reactor that he puts into his chest that functions not only as a power source for the suit, but also functions as an electromagnet and keeps those shrapnel pieces away from his heart. Well, in Iron Man 3. We see that at the end of the movie, he decides to go in and finally have surgery to remove the shrapnel from his chest and decouple the need for him to have that arc reactor in his body to kind of keep him alive.
Right.
That never happened in the comics.
Yeah.
The fact that he has shrapnel so close to his heart and the fact that arc reactor in his chest is the one thing that's keeping him alive and is something that's part of his body has always been that way in the comics. It's always so. The fact that they removed it from him, little bit kind of different from what's happened in the comics in the history.
Yeah, and I think they did that because they wanted to introduce, micro tech,
the nanotech,
stuff.
Yeah,
which was kind of cool. I mean, I guess it also played into the storyline where that old arc reactor technology was also killing him at some point, and he had to develop.
Iron Man 2.
Yeah, in Iron Man 2, and he had to develop, basically a new element to source to run the arc reactor, right? So that's kind of cool. I get that. That doesn't bother me as much as Spider-Man web shooters from his wrist.
And there's another part of Tony, and there's some big deviations between Tony Stark, the character in the comic books, and the Tony Stark we've seen in the MCU, primarily because of how great of an actor Robert Downey Jr. is. He really brought some parts to that character that we never saw in the comics.
Sure.
And it's just because he's such a great actor.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they never explored in the movies, and I kind of understand why. So Tony Stark in the comic books is a recovering alcoholic.
Yeah.
And this was something they really explored back in the, say, very early to mid 80s. They went through a whole run in the comic books with Iron Man where, he was a playboy, philanthropist, all the same things that we saw in the movies, but then he was an alcoholic. And he really couldn't come to grips with it, and eventually
didn't he get into a car accident and was paralyzed?
Started tearing him down. He had a big accident, hurt some people,
Yeah.
and so they went through this whole thing this redemption arc in the comics with him around alcohol, and he basically became dry and just never used it again. And that's something they never explored in the movies
because Robert Downey Jr. went through it in real life.
And the fact that was what I was getting at is the fact that we have a recovering drug addict playing this character.
Yeah.
What a great, powerful message and again, they just didn't have enough time to do it, maybe, but that's just something that I know of the character in the comics that was never explored in the movies. Yeah. Okay, next one, Ant-Man and the Wasp. So this is one of the big ones here, and when we first heard that the Ant-Man movie was coming out, we were all excited about it. Because the Ant-Man and the Wasp character were originally founding members of the Avengers.
They were original Avengers.
Avengers.
And they barely touched on that.
Avengers #1 was Captain America, Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man, Wasp. That was it. Yep. That's the team, right? Yep. And so, we're finally getting an Ant-Man character. Well, great. And then we found out that they were doing the Scott Lang version of Ant-Man.
Not Hank Pym.
Hang on a second. Hank Pym?
Yeah.
And, Hank Pym was the original member of the Avengers, the original Ant-Man, and Janet Van Dyne, the original Wasp. And they eventually had a relationship and fell in love and you had a daughter and all these other things. Scott Lang didn't come until decades later.
Yeah.
And, Hank Pym was so pivotal in some of the storylines of the Avengers, the creation of Ultron, becoming Giant Man. And
he created Ultron.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that was the other thing is that now
it wasn't Tony Stark and Bruce Banner.
Yeah, you can't explain Hank Pym's creation of Ultron because
please don't take this the wrong way. We love the representation in the MCU, no question, but it did deviate drastically from the comic.
Well, what Marvel decided to do is they decided to take Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne and make them Cold War heroes.
Yeah.
So they were those characters in the Cold War, and they were founding members of S.H.I.E.L.D. and all these other things. Mm-hmm. But they're now older, and the new generation of Hope Van Dyne and Scott Lang are going to become the Ant-Man and Wasp that we know today. And I was just like, wow, that is really a huge deviation from the comic books. And again, Hank Pym has been such a huge pivotal character in the Avengers and the comics forever. I just felt that was really strange that they chose to do that.
Yeah.
And Michael Douglas has done a great job with the Hank Pym character.
Yeah.
But,
big deviation from the comic.
That was just kind of one of those things I was like, wow, that's kind of strange. Vision, so we talked about Ultron being created by Hank Pym in the comics, and in the movies it was created by Tony Stark and Bruce Banner. And then we saw how Vision was created in the MCU in the Age of Ultron movie. It was created by Vision to kind of be a body for his...
Ultron, created by Ultron.
Created by Ultron. Vision was created by Ultron to be a body for his mind.
Yeah.
A new body made out of vibranium. In the comic books, Vision was created by Ultron to destroy the Avengers. So eventually, Hank Pym created Ultron. He was experimenting with artificial intelligence. Ultron eventually became sentient and started upgrading himself and said, I'm going to create a synthezoid, a humanoid kind of being that has some human features and thoughts, and I'm going to implant it inside of the Avengers, and he's going to destroy them from the inside. And eventually, Vision kind of became sentient, and the human part of him that Ultron created made him realize that what Ultron was doing was wrong. And this was kind of one of the things that never went through in the comics as well. So that was kind of strange. One of the things that we've talked about this before, Jarvis, who is Tony Stark's kind of was originally Tony Stark's AI system in his suit.
It ran everything, yeah.
Paul Bettany voiced that character for many, many years in Iron Man 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. Ultimately, Paul Bettany became Vision, because Jarvis's system was put into Vision. But Jarvis in the comic books is a human. It's the butler that works at Avengers Mansion.
Yeah.
That's the name of the butler is Jarvis. So Jarvis being the AI system in the suit was something that Marvel did. And it's kind of, for them to have a human butler in the movies would have been kind of weird.
Old school, old-fashioned, yeah.
Right. So then,
although you did see him in that when he goes back in time to get the Tesseract, you saw his father.
His father's
driver,
right? And we saw him in the Agent Carter television series on ABC. His name was Jarvis. So Tony Stark ultimately named the AI system after that version of Jarvis. But anyway, it was one of those things that's kind of weird, but at the same time, it just made so much sense that they didn't really ever do that in the comics. We saw this in Guardians of the Galaxy, Volume 2. Star-Lord's father was in the movies, Ego the Living Planet. Not the case in the comic books. It was actually Jason the Spartex, which is a kind of a king of a foreign or space-based race of individuals. They decided to use Ego the Living Planet because of kind of plot points they were doing around Celestials and things like that, and which was, I think if they introduced Jason as Spartax, they would have had to go through this big character development and understand. But Ego Living Planet made so much sense, and the way they did it in Volume 2 was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was very cool, and it answered a lot of questions, and the fact that he's this celestial and this ancient being, and now Star-Lord is part of him. I thought it was pretty cool.
And they used that as a way to explain why he was able to hold the Power Stone and not die and all those other things, right?
Not bad. That might have been an upgrade. Right.
Yeah, and I think the origin of him in the comic books was just kind of one of those things they just kind of threw in, and they said, "Hey, we'll make something better." Right.
Now this one, I'm sorry, I need to jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
This one kind of irritated me.
Oh, when it first happened?
We were
pissed. We were pissed.
We were pissed. Although love Ben Kingsley, I think he's a brilliant actor, and
Let's tell people what we're talking about first.
Okay, go ahead.
In Iron Man 2. The trailers to the movie, the lead up to the movie, of the eventual movie itself, was establishing the Mandarin as the big bad of Iron Man 2.
Which in the comics is a huge
and
big bad.
We were so bought in.
Yes.
We were like, oh my God, Iron Man 3. I'm sorry, not Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3. And we were so bought in because we were like, oh my God, the Mandarin is one of Iron Man's biggest adversaries in the comic books. It's just like, this is going to be so fantastic.
Yeah, this is awesome.
And the trailers and everything we're talking about.
And Ben Kingsley
and
was
like Ben Kingsley playing Mandarin is going to be awesome.
Gandhi.
And then what the pump fake, double fake they did with us in the movies, and basically
what a twist! What a twist!
It was Al Killian, who was in charge of AIM. Had hired an actor to play this character, and it was all fake. Aldrich Killian. It was all fake, and it was a way for them to kind of get Tony Stark kind of, bought into the fact that there was this big bad out there. And we were all like, how did you do this to that character?
What a twist. And he's some half-bit actor that they hired.
And Ben Kingsley was so good in that movie. But then we find out that...
As Trevor Slattery.
I'm an actor. What are you doing? Don't
Okay. Wait.
But then Marvel released, after that movie, a one-shot, which is kind of like a 10-minute video they released on YouTube.
Yeah.
That showed somebody walking into Trevor Slattery's prison cell, interviewing him. And it was a member of the Ten Rings,
the real
of
the Mandarin,
Ten Rings Association, and said, you stole somebody's name, and he's not happy,
right?
And you're going to pay for that. And
which, by the way, when Tony Stark was kidnapped or taken, in
Iron Man
1, the Ten Rings symbol was behind. They associated that symbol.
That group was associated with the
ones who stole him,
the Ten Rings, right? And again, I think they're going to correct this, and we assume, and we've been told they're going to be fixing this and showing us the real Mandarin in the Shang-Chi movie.
Yeah.
That being said, they're changing the Mandarin story from the comic books in a couple of ways. One, it sounds like or looks like they're making the Mandarin Shang-Chi's father,
Yeah.
or who raised Shang-Chi, at least, in a minute, which was absolutely not what happened in the comic books.
No.
And the 10 rings of power were
Now bracelets.
physical rings,
Yeah.
and it looks like they're going to be bracelets. That
Alien rings, right? They were alien rings.
Came down from an alien craft, and they each had, and we'll kind of get into that when we get into that movie a little bit, but so they're making some changes there. But the fact that we're getting the real Mandarin, we're excited about.
And we promised during that movie, when we start reviewing it, we'll go over the comic version and what happens in the movie.
We'll talk through that for sure. Next one, Black Widow. And
you've said this to me before about Black Widow, and I was shocked because I never knew it, and I never put it together.
They never touched on it in any of the early. So we first, if you remember, we first saw Black Widow as a character in the movies in the MCU in Iron Man 2.
Yeah, she was like a spy,
right? And then we ultimately saw her in Avengers, and then all the Avengers movies going forward, and ultimately Captain America. Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
We saw her character many, many times over. What people don't know is that there was a little bit of a scene or background scene in Age of Ultron where the Scarlet Witch messed with her mind. She had to go back. She kind of went back and was reviewing her time in the Red Room and all that other... Well, that
ballet and shooting a gun.
And we're hopefully going to be getting some more information about this in the Black Widow movie that's coming out.
Yeah, we will.
The Red Room and the system that she was part of. But that system does enhance those individuals that's in that program. So we've always assumed that Black Widow was just a spy and she could fight and she could shoot and all these other. But
like Hawkeye.
She is enhanced.
Yeah.
She has now. She's not as enhanced as Captain America, right? So she's not as strong or as capable as Captain America, but she does have some enhanced speed and strength and abilities.
And agility.
Right, and these are brought on by some of the experiments they did on the people in the Red Room, and maybe some super soldier serum they were using there. And we'll find that, and we hope and we think that this is coming in the Black Widow movie.
I think so.
Yeah.
The Red Guardian, that character in this movie is also kind of enhanced. So, yeah, I think so. But I never put it together. That's awesome. Okay.
And one of the last ones here, Carol Danvers. So we talked about this when Captain Marvel, the movie, came out. They showed her getting her powers from the spaceship that Marvel in the movie built.
Yes.
The thrust component was based on...
the power engine from the Tesseract.
The engine was based on a something that they had drawn from the Tesseract.
Yeah.
And when that engine exploded, it inundated Carol Danvers with this, cosmic energy that gave her powers, right?
Yeah.
Based on something from the Tesseract. In the comic books, Carol Danvers is half Kree. Her mom is a Kree, and her father is a Navy pilot.
Okay.
And she didn't know that her mom was Kree. And later on, she's becomes part of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the government and all these other. She's working on a project and is working with a Dr. Lawson. So Dr. Lawson is who...
Right, in the movie.
Was the person that she was...
Annette
Bening.
Uh-huh.
But Dr. Lawson in the comics was Marvel, the original Captain Marvel.
Yes.
Who is a Kree. And he's disguised himself to be a human so that he could interact with human beings. And so they're interacting and all these other... What ends up happening is Jan Rog kidnaps Carol Danvers to trap Marvel at some point in time. And she gets thrown into this machine called the Psyche Magnetron, and it scrambles her DNA and unlocks her hidden Kree powers.
Wow.
And that's how she gets her powers in the comic books. And it literally, it takes a couple months later before those manifest themselves. And as a matter of fact, when she first gets her powers in the comic books, she has now dual personality disorder. So when she wakes up and becomes Captain Marvel with her powers, the other version of her, Carol Danvers, has no idea that ever happened. So Captain Marvel would go out and do something and save somebody, and then come back to her apartment and go to sleep, and then Carol Danvers would wake up and never knew anything happened. It was one of these dual personality things, and eventually they merged them together, so she knew she was Captain Marvel and all this other stuff. But
that's
the way she got her powers and how she got them, and the fact that she's half Kree is something that's in the comics and very different.
Big deviation.
And again, I think that was the Marvel Studios making the Infinity Stones / Infinity Gems kind of make sense in the MCU.
Working it
kind
into the storyline.
Hey, we've got some characters like Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver and Vision who have powers from the Mind Stone. We got people like Captain Marvel have powers from the Space Stone, and we get some of that. So I think it was a way. It was convenient,
Yeah.
and I think, but it worked. I mean, again, I'm not upset about it.
Yeah.
It worked, right?
Yeah.
All right, and then the last one we saw in Avengers Endgame.
Stormbreaker.
Thor got a new weapon.
Uh-huh.
So Mjolnir was destroyed in Ragnarok. He needed a new weapon to fight Thanos. He goes to Eitri the dwarf. And Eitri creates a new weapon for him in Endgame called Stormbringer, and it's this incredible axe that is, as good as Mjolnir, and it can summon the Bifrost and all this. So Stormbringer, the weapon in the comic books,
Stormbreaker, right?
Stormbreaker. Okay, Stormbreaker.
Yeah, you wrote Stormbringer, but I think it's Stormbreaker.
Okay, we'll check that. We'll go back and check that after the fact. It was a weapon that was created by Odin and given to Beta Ray Bill.
That's a huge deviation.
So in the comic books, there was a character, Beta Ray Bill. He was part of a race of beings whose world was basically just destroyed.
Yeah.
And he wanted revenge on those who destroyed his Earth. And he wanted the power that Thor had. Thor and him ended up fighting, and he beat Thor and became worthy of Mjolnir.
Right.
And eventually, Odin said, "Yes, you're not only worthy of Mjolnir, but you're worthy of, revenge against your family's atrocities and all these other things. We'll create this weapon for you." And he gave him that weapon. So he created it for Beta Ray Bill.
We haven't seen Beta Ray Bill yet.
Well, we saw the face of Beta Ray Bill on the statue of Thor Ragnarok, and they've been talking about that maybe we'll see a version of him in Thor Love and Thunder.
That'd be cool.
That's a huge storyline. I know I've got those comics and I've given them to you. You've read through those, but that's a great story from the comic books.
Yeah, it's awesome.
All right, well, that's kind of some things that are different in the movies and different in the comics.
Very cool. I think that's interesting as shit. I love that stuff.
All right, 46 minutes. Do you hear something?
I hear a bell.
All right. Well, that's it for us this week. We'll be back next week for more Super Talk. To get in touch with us on social media, hit us up via email at supertalkpodcast@outlook.com or at supertalkpod on Twitter. Until then, stay super, everyone.
Woo!
They didn't say it could be done.
They did. They said it couldn't be done, but damn it, Professor, you delivered. Thank you, YouTube. Please subscribe. Please leave a comment. Please hit that notification bell. Thank you.